7-year-old dude sharing my messed up experience with my unfaithful wife. Let's bring in the main character, my wife Kelly, who's a year younger than me. She recently stepped out on me with a buddy of mine, who's also 27. We'll nickname him Jay for the sake of the story. Our tale kicks off when I was 22. I was at a buddy's wedding and ended up sitting next to Kelly. We were both tight with the couple. She was besties with the bride and I was pals with the groom. Little did we know our friends had cooked up a scheme to set us up by seating us together at the wedding. When I first saw Kelly, I was totally floored by her looks. As we started to talk, it was clear that we had a ton in common. Our chat was smooth and we hit it off right away. We gabbed, enjoyed the wedding grub, and even cut a rug on the dance floor. It was a night full of dancing, boozing, and you guessed it, a little canoodling right there in the middle of the dance floor. Our friends, the happy couple, were thrilled to see their matchmaking plot come to life. They jokingly asked us about our relationship, but we just brushed it off and kept enjoying our night. When we said our goodbyes, we didn't swap numbers. But then, a week later, I got a text from Kelly asking me out. Our bride friend had given her my number. I didn't think twice. I said yes, and that's how our relationship started to bloom. Fast forward a few years and things were going great. Apart from the usual squabbles that all couples have, nothing major ever came up. So eventually, I asked her to marry me. Less than a year later, we tied the knot. We had a little over a year of marital bliss before my world fell apart. Just before our first anniversary, I noticed Kelly acting different. She started guarding her phone. Her girls' nights out seemed to multiply, and our love life pretty much disappeared. I brought up these issues a few times, only to be brushed off and accused of being insecure. Kelly didn't seem to care about my feelings or worries, so in return, I became distant. The loving goodbye kiss when I left for work disappeared, and our chats dwindled to just the essentials. Then came the night when I couldn't take it anymore and decided to do some digging. While Kelly was asleep, I went through her phone and laptop, checking her texts, emails, and messaging apps, but didn't find anything fishy. But having read tons of stories on here, I knew there was one more place to check: her car. I snuck into her car, and lo and behold, I found a second phone. I knew right then what was happening, but I wanted to collect all the proof for when I confronted her. I didn't want her to brush it off, saying it was a one-time thing or some other baloney. I went through the phone, finding only one sketchy number. I read every text, hooked up the phone to my computer, and printed out every chat and picture. That night, I found myself looking up divorce attorneys in my home office. I spent hours checking out lawyer bios until I found one I liked. I shot him an email, but since it was a Saturday, I wasn't expecting a reply. My curiosity was through the roof. I wanted to know who the guy was, so I grabbed my phone, dialed the number I'd found, planning to pretend I was Spectrum. But as I dialed, Jay's contact popped up. I felt my world implode. I lost it, yelling and swearing in my office. My wife came in to see what was up. The second I saw her, I yelled at her to get out. I'd never raised my voice or sworn at her before. After that, I stayed locked in my office, silently seething and staring at the wall, needing a drink. I rang up a buddy from the wedding and asked if he'd meet me. He said yes, probably because he could tell something was off in my voice without me saying anything. I grabbed all the printouts and headed to the bar. I got there first and ordered 4 shots of Jack and a beer. When my friend, let's call him Tony, showed up, he found me finishing my last shot. When he asked what was up, I just blurted out that Kelly was cheating. He was the one who had introduced me to Jay, and all he could do was apologize over and over. Even though Jay and I weren't tight, we were cool whenever we bumped into each other at parties. I made Tony swear not to tell anyone about this. I hadn't even talked to Kelly or a lawyer yet. If his wife asked about me, he was to say I was having issues at work. He agreed. We drank and chatted for most of the night. Around 3 a.m., I called an Uber and headed home. When I got home, I saw Kelly asleep on the couch. Without saying a word, I went up to our bedroom and crashed. When I woke up, she was lying next to me. Not ready to confront her yet, I got dressed and left the house. I made a beeline for my office and drowned myself in work for the entire day. When I rolled in around 10 p.m., my wife was there waiting. She'd cooked dinner and asked if I wanted her to warm it up. I just said no and hit the sack. She followed me, asking what was eating at me. I told her to back off and that I needed some shut-eye, but she wouldn't let me be and kept prodding and trying to get my attention. Finally, I lost it and hollered at her to quit it and let me sleep. The next morning, I got an email from the attorney asking to meet up later that day. I confirmed the appointment and got ready to head out. When I came downstairs, I saw Kelly had whipped up breakfast and wanted to chat. I grabbed a little food and took a seat. She started off saying that I'd been off lately, and went on about how I'd changed. She wanted to know what was up. I told her work was a bear and promised her it would be over soon after I finished eating. I told her I had to bounce for work. I was watching the clock, waiting for my meeting with the attorney. The sit-down with the attorney went smoothly. I handed over all the proof I'd collected. The attorney told me, "Well, I'm sorry for the mess you're in, but I'm glad you've got all this evidence. You see, we're in a false state, so your wife can't touch most of your dough." I was floored. I hadn't even considered that. I just wanted to get the divorce over with ASAP. I asked the attorney to make copies of the evidence, and he agreed. When I got home, I was ready to face Kelly, but she was Mia. I rang her a couple of times but no answer, so I shot her a text. "I don't care if you're with Jay right now, get back here, we need to hash things out." Sure enough, she called back in less than a minute, asking what I was on about. All I told her was to get back here now. She showed up 15 minutes later. Interesting. I said 15 minutes is about the time it takes to drive from here to Jay's. What a coincidence. She looked at me, baffled. I gave her a minute to gather her thoughts, but she was too busy doing her best goldfish impression to respond. "Cat got your tongue?" I asked. She tried to deny everything and started gaslighting me. As she began to hurl personal insults, I slammed my fist on the table to shut her up. "Check out this mountain of proof I've got," I said, pulling out my stack of evidence. I showed her each printout, one by one. She told me to stop and started to cry. She even tried to apologize and said she loved me. "Funny," I said. "You were so gung-ho about tearing me down and throwing insults just a minute ago. Where's that fire now?" She tried to hug me, sobbing about how sorry she was. I put up my hand, telling her to back off. She kept trying to get close, insisting she could fix things and she'd do anything for me, suggesting we take this to the bedroom. "You think we should move this to the bedroom? I'm never laying a finger on you again. And guess who else has these papers? My attorney. I'm divorcing you. Now grab a bag, pack your stuff, and get the hell out of my house." That was 3 days ago, and since then, I haven't heard a peep from her. Sorry for the long story. For those who have been in my position, what should I be ready for next? Thanks for being here with me. Hi everyone. First off, a huge thank you to all of you who took the time to comment or send me messages. Your advice and kind words mean the world to me. Sorry if I haven't managed to respond to all your comments. I've been trying to keep up. After the first post, I was swamped with a ton of advice. Being the level-headed guy I try to be, I decided to take most of it. This morning was all about damage control. First on the agenda, scheduling a doctor's visit for an STD test. That's now set for 2 days from now. Next, I touched base with my support crew, my dad and a couple of close buddies. They've all been super supportive, offering their own 2 cents and even assistance. But since I've got this catastrophe pretty much under control, I kindly turned down their help. Then it was time to face her family. I shot a text to her folks thanking them for welcoming me into their clan and for everything they'd done for me, but with a heavy heart. Not really. They were kind of overbearing. And even though they're good people, I'm glad I don't have to deal with them anymore. I let them know that Kelly and I were splitting up. I told them they could hit me up with any questions if they wanted to. Next, I had to drop the bomb on Kelly's sister. We'd been tight, and I knew this news would wreck that friendship. I texted her, "Hey, I hate to text you this, but Kelly and I are getting a divorce. I wanted you to know from the get-go you treated me like a brother, and I'll still be here if you ever need anything from me." Not long after, her folks got back to me. Here's how that chat went down. "Parents, we're really sorry to hear this. What's going on? Why hasn't Kelly told us anything?" Me, "Kelly's been having an affair for at least a year. I figured she might have clued you in." "Parents, we haven't heard a peep from her. We'll give her a ring. Are you certain about the affair?" Me, "I'm sure as hell. I found their texts." "Parents, we're really sorry. We'll try to reach out to her." After handling her family, it was time to tackle the big job of facing Jay's fiancé. I had this nagging feeling that Kelly and Jay might have cooked up some clever scheme to keep their secret under wraps. Either Kelly hadn't let the cat out of the bag about me knowing, or they're just boneheads. I texted her around 2 p.m., asking if we could grab a coffee. We met at some hipster coffee joint. As I choked down my terrible coffee, I said to her, "There's no sugarcoating this, so I'll just spit it out. Jay's been stepping out on you with my wife for over a year." She was clearly shocked, so I added, "I only discovered it a few days ago. I should have told you then, but I had a divorce to get rolling and my own pity party to throw." She asked how I found out, so I spilled the beans. That's in the first post. I asked if she wanted to see the proof I'd collected and pulled out a binder. She took the binder and skimmed the messages and pictures and just started to cry quietly. I told her she could take the binder. I even had extra copies in case she wanted to confront Jay or put his lying skills to the test. She thanked me, stood up, took the binder, and walked out. As she left, she looked totally crushed. Before she left, I made sure to let her know that if she needed anything from me, all she had to do was ask. Now I know a bunch of you told me to stay on the wagon and keep a level head, but honestly, my world's just come crashing down. So I've decided to take this week to wallow in self-pity. On my back deck, with some booze, cigars, and some blasting tunes. But don't sweat it. This pity party will wrap up when the week's done. I plan to quit feeling sorry for myself and get back to my regular routine. On a brighter note, I've already boxed up most of her stuff. Clothes, jewelry, you name it. I even did her a solid and tossed in our wedding album and every photo with her in it, in the boxes. I've been told I'm a stand-up guy. If and when she decides to swing by for her stuff, I don't plan on playing the gracious host for any longer than I have to. And before your mind goes into overdrive, let me assure you that I didn't trash her clothes or anything. Okay, I might have smashed a few picture frames, but I mean, who's keeping score? As of right now, everything's pretty chill. I've done my part, spreading the ugly truth about the affair to everyone who needed to know. My doctor's visit is scheduled. My attorney is working to get me out of this jam, and 90% of her stuff is neatly packed in boxes. If she keeps her distance, this might just be the smoothest divorce in the books. Update. So here's the latest. Since the last update, I've been wallowing in my personal pity party. Drinking, and more drinking. I'd say this is my first somewhat clear-headed moment since the bombshell dropped. The whole roller coaster of emotions has been tough to put into words, but Numb probably hits the nail on the head, so I mentioned that I'd clued everyone in on the situation. The only one who didn't respond was Kelly's sister Wendy, who I've always been tight with. That very night, after a few more rounds, I blacked out on my back deck, a hodgepodge of bottles and beer cans keeping me company. I woke up to the smell of breakfast cooking. My first thought was, oh great, Kelly's back and thinks a breakfast peace offering is her get-out-of-jail-free card. Gearing up for a shouting match, I was stunned to see it was Wendy. Wendy saw I was up, bolted over to me and gave me a hug. She then guided me to the table and dished up a plate. As I chowed down, she gave me her side of the story. Apparently, Kelly had shown up at her place, playing down our issues as a temporary hiccup. When I texted Wendy about the divorce, she confronted Kelly, who crumbled and spilled the beans. I set her straight. There's no way she spilled all the beans. I then laid out the whole dirty story. Wendy led on that Kelly had tried to pass it off as a one-off slip-up. I made it clear to Wendy that making up with Kelly was off the table, and that Kelly should start looking for a lawyer. To my surprise, Wendy had my back. She made it clear that while she cared for her sister, she was my friend too and wasn't going to ditch me. This warmed my heart. Wendy bunked with me for 2 days in the guest room, you rascal, and took off this morning. As she was heading out, I was packing for a trip to my cabin, which I owned before we got hitched. So it's a no-go zone for Kelly. I was grabbing my hunting and fishing gear when Wendy asked to come along. As much as I appreciated the company, I suggested she should probably check in on her sister. She agreed, gave me a hug, and left. For any of you cooking up a romance between Wendy and me, slow your roll. She's only 20, way too young for me. We have a solid friendship, nothing more. In other news, I did get tested at the doctor's. The results should be back by Monday. I've also been touching base with Jay's fiancé, offering a shoulder to cry on if she needs to vent. I'll be online for a bit, so feel free to drop any questions or advice in the comments or messages. However, I'm heading to the cabin for the weekend where there's no internet, so I'll be off the grid. I want to thank each and every one of you for reading, reaching out and showering me with support. You all have been the beacon of hope at the end of a very bleak tunnel. To those of you navigating similar storms, my advice is to stay on track, set one goal at a time. In my case, it was lawyer, doctor, then spreading the word. And remember, keep your personal business off the internet. Thanks again for your patience and support. Here I am again. I filled you in on Wendy coming over to my place and staying for a couple of days. She took off when I was heading to my cabin for some hunting. Good news. I bagged a nice, chunky 8-pointer buck on my first day out there. This was a lucky break, as it left the rest of my time for fishing. I caught a couple of decent-sized ones, which turned into a meal and the next one to be butchered. I spent the rest of my stay at the cabin, processing my deer and soaking up the natural beauty. Apart from a drink or two a day, I spent my trip sober as promised. My boozing was limited to the previous week. Now on to the events of the past few days. I got a call from my doctor, and thankfully, all is clear. Not too shocking given the lack of steamy nights with Kelly in the past few months, but it's always better to be safe than sorry. I touched base with Jay's fiancé, but didn't get a response for a while. She eventually got back to me saying she was bunking with her family. Reading between the lines, it seems she's not having a great time either. I told her if there's anything I could do, she just had to give me a shout. She asked to meet for coffee, which I was more than happy to do. We met at the same offbeat hipster coffee joint the next day and chatted for about 2 hours. We hashed out everything about Kelly and me. She was curious about the steps I was taking and whether there was any chance of patching things up. I made it clear that cheating was a deal breaker for me, given the selfishness and disrespect it takes to step out, let alone for a year. It was clear Kelly didn't really give a damn about me. When asked about her plan, she said she was all mixed up as everything she thought was true turned out to be a pack of lies. She wasn't sure about her next move, whether to move on or forgive him. I honestly told her, if you can forgive someone for stepping out on you for that long, you're a better person than me. She shared that her family was suggesting that she forgive Jay and go ahead with their wedding. I told her just because it's what your family wants doesn't mean you have to go along with it. Jay obviously doesn't respect marriage. He cheated on you, his fiancé, with my wife. That's a clear sign he's not husband material. I pushed her to do what she felt was right and to make her own choices. I shared that when I found out, I tried to find a way my heart could fool my brain into thinking I could swallow it and forgive her, but I just couldn't pull it off. I encouraged her to trust her gut. From my experience, the brain and heart can sometimes lead you down the wrong path, but gut instincts are usually spot on. She thanked me, and we went our separate ways. The next day, my lawyer let me know that Kelly had been served at her job. Wendy rang me soon after saying Kelly hadn't left her room all day and was crying in bed. I explained she'd been served and was probably wrestling with the fallout of her actions. Wendy asked about my cabin trip and I filled her in. After a quick chat, we hung up and I started bracing myself for the possible storm that Kelly might kick up now that she's been served. So here I am, waiting patiently and stocked up with Advil for the potential headache. I've given my buddy a heads up and he's agreed to swing by and be a witness, just in case things go south. I'm currently writing this waiting for Hurricane Kelly to potentially rip through my house for when she does. Update. Things have been a bit of a whirlwind since my last post. About an hour or so after my last post, I was on standby for Kelly to roll up at the house. Given everything that's gone down, I wasn't sure what to expect from her. I checked all the security cams around the house to make sure they were up and running, both inside and outside. I also gave my buddy a ring letting him know that Kelly was served today, and if she pops up, he needs to hustle over as soon as he can. I wasn't about to end up in the slammer because of this woman. As it turns out, my caution was well-founded. Kelly rolled up at the house, pounding on the door and hollering to be let in. I immediately rang my buddy and Wendy to hustle over. She was swearing and pleading with me to let her in. All I could do was chuckle, wondering why she didn't just use her keys to get in. When my buddy showed up, he stayed in his truck and started filming the ongoing spectacle on his phone. His wife, a friend of Kelly's, hopped out of the truck and tried to soothe Kelly. Instead, Kelly slapped her and yelled at her to butt out. This made my buddy dial up the cops. When they rolled up, Kelly tried to play the damsel in distress. She sobbed and told the officers that I smacked her and booted her out of the house. My buddy and his wife relayed what they saw when they got there, but since they didn't witness the initial event, they couldn't confirm or deny Kelly's claims. One of the officers came up to my door, and as soon as I opened it, Kelly pointed at me, claiming I smacked her, and demanded they cuff me. I was being slapped in cuffs when I insisted that I could prove her fibs. The officer let me show him the footage from the outdoor cams. After checking out the video, the officer apologized for jumping the gun and assuming I was the bad guy. I told him I didn't hold it against him. Apparently during Kelly's tirade, she screamed out, "He slapped me," leading my neighbors to ring up the cops too, causing the officers to form their judgment even before showing up. After wrangling with the cops for about half an hour, Kelly was finally cuffed and slapped with charges of disturbing the peace, public intoxication, and a Dewey. As the police were leading Kelly to their cruiser, Wendy rolled up. She asked me what went down, so I showed her the video of the whole fiasco on my phone. An officer came up to me, handing me the case number and some other paperwork. Wendy started firing off questions about the charges, so I just ducked back inside. Wendy followed me in shortly after and plopped down next to me. She explained that she had only left her house for 10 minutes to make a quick run to the store. When she got back, Kelly was nowhere to be seen in the living room. She figured Kelly had hit the hay after one too many glasses of wine. Wendy and I chatted for a bit. She asked if she could crash the night, and I told her she was welcome anytime. Wendy let me know that Kelly had to spend the night in the slammer. I'm not sure why, but she could be bailed out in the morning. After I had ducked back inside, Wendy rang up her parents to fill them in on what was going down and to see if they could bail Kelly out since Wendy didn't have the dough. We knocked back a beer and soon hit the hay. When I woke up the next morning, Wendy had already split to meet with her parents. I haven't heard from Kelly, Wendy, or their folks since then, but I can only imagine that it's not a fun chat they're having. I haven't had a peep from Kelly since that fiasco, but her lawyer touched base with mine, indicating that he'll be her legal representation. Finally, we can get the ball rolling on the legal proceedings. Also, I touched base with Jay's fiancé to see if there were any new developments on her end. We shot a few texts back and forth, and she let me know that she had booted Jay out of her house. Her dad and brother packed up all his stuff and hauled it over to his place. She confided that while her dad and brother were itching to give Jay a piece of their mind, she asked them to hold off. She wants to put this mess in her rearview mirror and move on. She appreciated me checking in on her and assured me that her tight-knit group of friends were there to back her up. On Friday, as soon as I clocked out of work, I made a beeline for home. My plan was to spend the weekend at my cabin. When I pulled up, I found Wendy in my driveway. She wanted to gather her sister's stuff and had a laundry list of items that Kelly expected to be returned. Almost all of the items were already boxed up or stashed in my garage waiting to be picked up. I made it clear to her that I wouldn't be on the hook for any accusations of damage to Kelly's stuff. Instead, I offered to foot the bill for a moving company to come pack and haul all her things. This was mainly because I was cabin-bound and didn't have the bandwidth to deal with Kelly's drama. Wendy was on board with this and wished me a good trip. She grabbed a box of Kelly's clothes and loaded them into her car. Before she took off, she asked if she could tag along on my cabin trip, to which I responded with a resounding yes. The weekend at the cabin was a blast. The last time I was there, I realized what a gem that place was. With its stunning vistas and total isolation, it provided a peaceful sanctuary where one could truly unwind. On Monday, I rang up a moving company, and by Tuesday, 3 burly guys with a massive truck showed up and began loading up Kelly's stuff. I meticulously documented and snapped photos of each item as they were being packed and loaded. I thanked the movers for their patience and slipped each of them an extra $50. I sent all the photos and recordings to my lawyer and carried on with my day. The house feels bare, but tidy without all of Kelly's clutter. My lawyer had cautioned me not to toss anything that could be deemed shared property, so I relocated most of the furniture to a storage unit. I've been crashing in the guest room since she took off, and only now have I started shopping for new furniture. Most of it will probably end up in the garage now that I've got the room. Despite it all, I don't see myself holding on to the house, even if I get it in the divorce, as it's now a minefield of bitter memories. Thanks for sticking around. Hey gang, here's the latest scoop. A few days post the movers hauling off Kelly's stuff, my lawyer got some legal document. Apparently, I had somehow wrecked her belongings, and she was demanding I cough up $1,500, threatening to drag me to court if I didn't. Unfazed, my lawyer quickly shot back at her lawyer with all the videos and photos, asking where these alleged damages were. According to him, this situation just further exposes her erratic behavior to the judge, and while it might be a pain now, it will serve as solid evidence in court. It seems her lawyer wasn't quite ready for the level of thoroughness I bring to the table. I mean, I've documented and photographed everything when I unearthed my wife's infidelity. For some reason, I found myself gravitating towards this page. I read the nightmare stories about what some people's ex-spouses did to them, and I was hell-bent on not becoming another cautionary tale. I've steeled myself for just about any allegation she could hurl at me. At this point, there's little she could pull that would shock me. Kelly has been ringing me about every other day, but like a guy dodging a sales call, I never answer. If she leaves a voicemail, I don't even bother giving it a listen. I just forward it straight to my lawyer. Every time I send something to my lawyer, he has a good laugh and tells me, "You are a lawyer's dream. You follow every piece of advice to the letter, and you've amassed a heap of evidence all by yourself." I've never had a client who's been so on the ball. He repeats this like clockwork, but it never fails to put a smile on my face. Knowing I'm handling things right definitely makes this wild ride a tad more manageable. About 2 or 3 weeks back, my lawyer let me know we had enough ammo to bury her without stepping foot in a courtroom. If our attempt falls flat, at least it would look good on us for trying. We set a date to meet at a neutral lawyer's office. He cautioned me not to react to anything Kelly might throw at me, reminding me that everything would be on record for a judge to review if it goes to court. We got there early, and to my surprise, she was already there, her lawyer in tow. It felt like a scene straight out of a legal drama. The lawyers kicked off their cordial banter while Kelly and I sat in silence, the air thick with tension. Kelly's lawyer broke the silence asking about our proposal. My lawyer, with a scoff that could give any sitcom character a run for their money, responded. Given the heap of proof showcasing Kelly's unfaithfulness and unacceptable conduct, the only deal we're putting on the table is half the proceeds from the house sale and half of the savings account. That's more than any court would grant you. Basically, you'll leave with what you brought into the marriage. Kelly started to weep. pleading if there was any way she could mend things. I shot back, "You've been betraying me even before we said I do. There's nothing you could possibly do to erase or make up for your actions. Sign the papers. It's more than you deserve, and I want to put an end to this whole charade you've spun." She excused herself to the ladies' room, likely to pull herself together. When she came back, still with teary eyes, she signed the papers and left shortly after. "In about a month, everything will be filed, and all that's left for me to do is sell the house.